It's 11:14 p.m. on a Sunday evening. You're stretched out in bed, crunching the same old figures again. Not because something went wrong, nothing went wrong. You're just stretched out in the darkness, replaying the same calculations you ran last Sunday and the Sunday before that. Mortgage, car loan, student debt, grocery bills, trying to work out whether this is finally the month you pull ahead, or whether you'll just keep your head above water, the same way you've been doing for the past 3 years. Deep down, you already know the outcome. You've always known it, but you keep rerunning the numbers anyway. Because the only alternative is admitting that this is simply what daily life feels like now. Meanwhile, your neighbor, same street, bought around the same time, similar house, no radically different paycheck, woke up last Tuesday and just decided to take the whole week off. No emergency, no message to his boss. He simply didn't feel like showing up. So he didn't. And here's the kicker. He's not wealthier than you. He's just stopped running that math altogether. My name is Gen Z Invest, and I spend way more time than I should thinking about why two people in nearly identical circumstances can end up leading radically different lives. Today, we're going to unpack something the personal finance world barely ever explains: what actually happens to your money, your career, your mindset, and your real lived existence the very second you make that final mortgage payment. And I promise you, by the end of this, that Sunday night arithmetic is going to look completely different. Because here's the thing nobody tells you when you're 12 years deep into a 30-year mortgage. You don't just erase a monthly bill when it's paid off. You drop a prison sentence you'd stopped realizing you were serving. Let's kick off with the raw numbers, because the math here is far more ruthless than most people realize in both directions. The average monthly mortgage payment in 2025 hit $2,329, and that's just principal and interest, nothing else. For someone who bought or refinanced at today's rates, $2,845 is a more realistic figure now. The median American household takes home roughly $5,400 per month after taxes, Social Security, and Medicare. That means a standard mortgage payment eats up 43% of your disposable income before you've bought a single loaf of bread or made one car payment. 43%. The ceiling that every financial expert on the planet agrees on is 28%. So, the majority of people with a mortgage are walking around 15 percentage points over the limit every single month for 3 decades. Congratulations. You are technically a functioning adult who has also agreed to be financially suffocated in slow motion until you turn 63. Here's what that actually looks like in practice. Meet the Garcías. Dual income, combined $110,000 a year, which sounds solid until you filter it through what life actually costs. After federal taxes, state taxes, FICA, and a modest $401k contribution, they're taking home about $6,800 per month. Now let's watch that money vanish. Mortgage on their $380 house, $2,400. Property taxes, $380. Homeowner's insurance, $200. Maintenance reserve because the FIC doesn't care that it's December, $320. That's $3,300 a month just for the legal right to occupy the building. They've got $3.50 left. To car payments, they both commute. $800, car insurance, $240. Gas, nothing in their suburb is walkable. $280. Student loans, those degrees didn't pay for themselves. $550. Health insurance premiums, employer only partly covers it. $380. Groceries for two people trying to eat like adults, $700. Utilities, electric, gas, water, internet, phones, $420. We're down to $130 remaining, and we haven't touched clothing. Kids' activities, that $80 co-pay from last month's urgent care visit, the dog that just started limping, any savings beyond that small $401k. Or any concept of fun. The Garcías are not irresponsible. They don't own a boat. They've never been to Europe. They're two working professionals who did everything they were supposed to do. And every single financial choice they make, every career conversation, every request for flexibility, every time one of them thinks about going back to school or launching a side project, gets filtered through one silent question: can we still cover a mortgage? That question runs in the background of their lives like a browser tab they can never close, and that tab disappears the day the mortgage is paid off, the moment that happens. Something the Garcías can barely even imagine right now starts to unfold. They begin making completely different decisions. More on them in a minute. Let's talk about what actually gets freed up when the mortgage is gone. Because people consistently get this wrong in both directions. Either they underestimate the impact, or they overestimate the cash they'll have on hand. When the mortgage payment vanishes, you don't suddenly have the full amount available to invest. Property taxes, insurance, and maintenance still exist. For a $400 home, you're looking at roughly $838 per month in ongoing costs with no mortgage. So if your payment was $2,845, you've freed up about $2,000 a month in real, deployable money, not $2,845, but roughly $2,000. And I want to be absolutely precise here. That is still insane in terms of what it can do over time. If you take that $2 and put it into a basic S&P 500 index fund earning the historical average of around 8% annually, here's what happens in 5 years. In 5 years, $146,000. In 10 years, $365,000. In 15 years, $693. In 20 years, $1,177,000. You would have contributed $480,000 of your own money over those 20 years. The market would have contributed $697,000 on top of that, more than you put in yourself. The majority of your eventual wealth would come from compound interest, not from working harder. This is the part of the mortgage payoff story nobody tells you in the bank's office when you're signing the 30-year paperwork. They're not going to mention that their product is keeping you away from $11 million. Funny how that works now. That argument goes, Gen Z invest. If your mortgage rate is below 5%, you're mathematically better off investing the extra money than prepaying principal. And look, that argument isn't wrong. Let me give you the real version. Wharton professor Michael Roberts ran the numbers on a $500,000 mortgage at 3% and found that investing extra payments in the stock market outperformed early payoff. In roughly 95% of historical 30-year periods, the logic is clean, guaranteed. 3% return from killing debt loses to a historical 8% return from equities. About 82% of existing mortgage holders have rates below 5% right now. So if that's you, the spreadsheet says, invest the difference. Here's what the spreadsheet doesn't know. It assumes you actually invest the difference. Most people don't. They spend it. The mortgage payment was forced savings. When it disappears and gets replaced by discretionary cash, a terrifying percentage of households absorb it into lifestyle creep within 18 months and have nothing to show for it. The spreadsheet also assumes you have the psychological fortitude to watch your investment portfolio drop 40% during a market crash while you still owe $2,500 a month in mandatory payments on the house. That is a fundamentally different experience than watching the same portfolio drop 40% from a house you own outright and can stay in no matter what. One scenario is uncomfortable. The other is the reason people make catastrophic financial decisions under pressure. And here's the thing the invest the difference crowd never mentions. You've been making every financial decision of your adult life while carrying this debt. According to actual peer-reviewed research, debt impairs cognitive functioning in measurable ways. You have literally been making the should I pay off the mortgage or invest decision from a cognitively compromised state. So maybe weigh your own math accordingly. At mortgage rates above 7%, which applies to most people who've bought since 2020, to aggressive payoff becomes a very competitive guaranteed return that's hard to argue against. Between 4.5% and 7%. It's a genuine judgment call. Below 4.5%, invest the difference, but only if you'll truly invest it, and not let it quietly turn into better takeout habits. The real answer, as usual, isn't a rate. It's knowing yourself. Let me circle back to the psychology research, because there's something here the personal finance world rushes past and really shouldn't. A 2019 study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences tracked what happened to people when their debts were eliminated, not reduced, eliminated. Anxiety dropped not by a little, but from 78% of participants showing clinical symptoms down to 53%. That's a 25 percentage point reduction in diagnosable anxiety just from closing debt accounts. People made better decisions, not just felt better about their decisions, but actually performed better on cognitive assessments. They became measurably less impulsive, less likely to grab the short-term reward at the expense of the long-term outcome. But here's the finding that stopped me cold. The number of debt accounts closed mattered more than the dollar amount of relief. Closing a $3,000 credit card produced more psychological improvement than getting a $5,000 debt. Partially reduced, the brain doesn't care about the dollar amount, it cares about the open tab. And for most people who've fought their way through credit cards, car payments, and student loans, the mortgage is the last open tab, the last thing humming in the background when it closes. The refrigerator you'd stopped hearing finally goes quiet. Northwestern researchers separately found that carrying high debt-to-asset ratios correlates with measurably higher blood pressure, higher rates of depression, and worse self-reported health even after controlling for income levels. This is not a metaphor. The mortgage is not just a financial obligation, it is a physiological one. Your body has been carrying it, and when it's gone, your body notices. Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the part I think about most. When the Garcías mortgage disappears, let's say they aggressively paid it off at year 22 instead of year 30, which is absolutely achievable, their monthly expense floor drops by $2,000. In fire math, the formula that says you need 25 times your annual expenses to be financially independent. Eliminating $24,000 a year in mandatory costs reduces their financial independence number by $600,000. 0. They haven't earned more money, they haven't gotten a promotion or launched a business, they've just changed what survival costs. And that number determines everything. When your monthly survival requires both incomes running at full capacity, neither person can afford to leave a job they hate. Take a pay cut to do something meaningful. Start a business that needs 18 months to get profitable. Ask for a schedule that doesn't wreck their health. Or do anything that might threaten the income that feeds the mortgage. You are financially indentured not because you're weak, but because the math demands it. So the mortgage is a 30-year employment contract you signed without realizing it. Academic research published in 2020 found that improved housing security led to significant increases in business formation, particularly among women and non-white entrepreneurs, who are disproportionately affected by financial exposure. A separate study found that leveraged homeownership, meaning carrying a mortgage, significantly reduces entrepreneurship, with the effect strongest when loan-to-value ratios are highest. The mechanism is exactly what you'd expect. Every dollar trapped in a mandatory monthly payment is a dollar that can't absorb risk elsewhere. So what does the Garcías life look like at year 22? Mortgage gone. Mrs. García stops running every career conversation through the question of whether this job is stable enough to cover the payment. She takes the role with more meaning and slightly less salary because they can afford the difference now. Mr. García starts the contracting business he's been talking about since 2021, because one bad quarter no longer means they lose the house. They're not rich, their income didn't change, but their decisions changed completely because the math changed completely. Now, a brief moment of honesty, because I promised you the real numbers, not the fantasy version. The house isn't actually free once the mortgage is paid off. I know you were hoping I'd let you have that one, but the property taxes aren't going anywhere. They've gone up 27% nationally since 2019. If you're in New Jersey, you're paying $743 a month on a median home mortgage or not. Your house is basically paying rent to the state, regardless of whether you owe bank. Homeowners insurance has jumped 50% since 2020, because apparently the atmosphere is trying to get its money back. And the 1% annual maintenance rule, budgeting 1% of your home's value per year for repairs, still applies on a $400 home. That's $333 a month set aside for the water heater that will pick 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve to announce its retirement. Added up, your paid-off home still costs roughly $838 a month nationally to own, closer to $1,300 in high-tax states. So the $2,845 payment disappearing doesn't hand you $2,845 to invest. It hands you roughly $2,000 in new freedom, which, as we've established, compounds to over $1 million in 20 years. But plan for the real number, because the gap between I thought I'd have $2,845 and I actually have $2,000 zero is exactly the size of a November property tax bill that will genuinely ruin your week if you weren't expecting it. Let's talk about who actually gets here, because the demographics tell a story worth sitting with. About 40% of U.S. owner-occupied homes are now mortgage-free, an all-time high. Sounds encouraging. Then you look at who those people are. 63% of homeowners 65 and older are mortgage-free, versus fewer than 28% of working-age homeowners. The average age of payoff is 58 to 63. Meanwhile, the median first-time home buyer age just hit 36. A 30-year mortgage from age 36 doesn't end until 66, 3 years into what used to be called retirement. And here's the number that genuinely unsettles me. In 1989, 3% of homeowners over 80 still had a mortgage. Today, nearly a third do. The share of 65 to 79-year-olds still carrying mortgages has gone from 24% to 41% in 30 years. Median mortgage debt among seniors is up 400%. We are dragging housing debt into retirement at a scale that has never happened before in American history, and we're doing it quietly. Like it's normal, like it's fine. It is not fine. Only 23% of all Americans are completely debt-free, no mortgage, no car payment, nothing. Which means what we're talking about today is genuinely rare. Rare enough that when people cross that finish line, they consistently report something they couldn't have predicted. It's not just relief. It's a kind of silence they didn't know was missing. So how do you actually accelerate this? Because the math on getting there 5 or 8 years early is more compelling than most people run. On a $450,000 mortgage at 65%, your standard payment is $2,844 a month. Total interest over 30 years $573,840. You pay more in interest than the house initially cost. Sit with that. The bank is going to collect more from you in interest alone than the entire value of the home you bought. It's a beautiful business model if you're the bank. Bi-weekly payments, cutting your monthly payment in half and paying every 2 weeks sounds like accounting trivia until you realize it results in 13 full payments per year instead of 12. That one change, which costs you nothing in lifestyle, cuts 5 to 6 years off the loan and eliminates over $119,000 in interest. One extra payment per year, $119,000 gone. Throwing an extra $500 a month at principal shortens the timeline by about 8 years and kills $150,000 in interest. An extra $1,000 a month nearly halves the loan term to 17 years. None of these are heroic sacrifices. They're the difference between paying off your house at 55 versus 63. And the life you get to live at 55 with no mortgage versus the one you're living at 60. 3. Waiting for it to end is, based on everything we've covered, not a small difference. So let's land this. What do you actually do on the day the last payment processes? 1. Verify that your lender filed the lien release and that you receive your deed. This is the most boring sentence in the video and also the most important one to remember, because lenders occasionally just don't file it, and you find out 3 years later when you try to sell the house and discover you don't legally own what you've been paying for. File this under things that are both tedious and essential, which describes most of adult life. 2. Before you redirect a single dollar, rebuild your emergency fund. You've been house poor for years. Your reserves are almost certainly thinner than they should be. Get 6 to 12 months of your new lower expenses in liquid savings before you do anything ambitious. 3. Then deploy the former payment in this order. Max the 401k match first. That's a 50% to 100% guaranteed return, and nothing else on this list comes close. Max the Roth IRA, $7,000 a year in 2025 grows completely tax-free. The IRS never touches the gains. Max the 401k contribution limit $23,500. Fund an HSA if you're eligible. Then pour everything remaining into a taxable brokerage account with low-cost index funds. If you're redirecting to $1,000 a month through all of these at 8%, you're at $365,000 in a decade and $1.17 million in 20 years, not because you did anything clever, but because you survived the mortgage, closed the last tab, and finally gave compound interest the room it needed to do what it was always going to do if you just got in the bank. Out of the way. Here's what I actually want you to take from this. The mortgage wasn't just a large bill. It was a permission slip you had to silently ask for every time you wanted to do something different with your life. Want to leave a job you hate? Better check if you can still cover the mortgage. Want to start something risky? Better make sure the mortgage is safe first. Want to take a pay cut to do work that matters? You can't. The mortgage. For most people, for most of their adult lives, the mortgage is the invisible hand that shapes nearly every major decision they make. Not the only hand, but the one with the tightest grip. When it's gone, the grip releases. That's what the Garcías discover at year 22. That's what every person who gets their reports, not that they're suddenly wealthy, though the compounding takes care of that in time, but that they call and finally make decisions based on what they actually want, rather than what the mortgage requires. That's the change nobody talks about. That's the one that matters most. So that Sunday night math you've been running in the dark, you're not going to run it forever. But the people who get to stop running it the earliest aren't the ones who earn the most. They're the ones who understood what the finish line was actually worth and ran toward it on purpose.